Mariam drew the curtains back from the window leading to the road, leaning her head out to take in her first school-free breath. As soon as she felt the polluted air fill her lungs, she regretted doing so. She choked, coughing profusely. Mariam had graduated from university yesterday, and she should have been happy. However, her first instinct was to cry. Her education had been a feat of pure will and sacrifice. She sat and began thinking about President Eugene Okech, the man who had taken over the country back in 2017 and refused to release the reins of leadership. To think there was such an intoxicating excitement during these December elections, when her country was poised to elect Cheers Daba as the first woman president. The world was watching in awe as movements of young people, women of all ages, people with disabilities, LGBTIQ activists, informal sector workers, had all managed to mobilize to transform education, healthcare, land, employment, and governance. Ba was set to ride into victory, and then Okech, supported by a paramilitary squad, launched a coup d'etat and violently took control of the country. It all went downhill from there. School had been particularly difficult. Mariam's passion was in technology, but she wasn't able to learn new ways to code, nor was she given a chance to develop her own apps. In university, Mariam wasn't challenged in the classroom. When class did meet, she was completely uninspired by the boring and irrelevant lectures and having to recite about European civilization and Britain's role in the Second World War. Teachers had no incentive to do any different because it wasn't safe to do so. They were poorly paid and therefore rarely turned up for work. When they did show, many extracted money from students and some even tried to force students to provide sex in exchange for passing exams. The only passionate lecturers were the ones taken over by the promise of heaven. On a regular basis, her physics professor would start quoting religious texts and telling students to abandon science and turn to God. Religious leaders were all men who focused on spreading fear, terror, disconnection, and violence to their growing congregations, particularly when it came to nonconformist people. Mariam, a young woman who was a lesbian, differently abled, intelligent, and free-spirited, was a dangerous combination for sure. A handful of women students had tried to organize against this abuse of power at her university, but their efforts were reported by a group called Men Against Women Empowerment, MAWE, who are well financed by the Global Fund for Men. The women were jailed indefinitely as conspirators. It had taken Mariam nearly a decade to complete her university education. Not only was school tuition ridiculously expensive, classes could be shut down at a moment's notice. One of the few decent paying jobs which her fellow classmates were all vying for was as a watcher. There was a surveillance center in every neighborhood in the country where employees would scroll through hours of real-time footage and report suspicious human behavior to the police. Radicals suspected of plotting against the government would have their footage screened on national television or on all media platforms. Since electricity was irregular and Mariam's family could not always afford fuel for the diesel generator, her mother taught her how to string together junk parts in just the right way to create their own forms of electrical power. It was this ancestral, intuitive, and innovative know-how that spurred Mariam to start a young women's technology collective, Joa Tech. They found a hideaway spot in the neighborhood not too far from the e-waste landfill. Government restrictions on citizen organizing meant that Mariam and her friends had to use a number of different aliases, frequently change their passwords, and constantly upgrade and expand the security architecture for all digital data and communications. Their safety was always in question, and travel for Mariam to the landfill could prove difficult due to the lack of wheelchair-friendly spaces within the city. They worked together to make apps that they could post on the AfriFemNet, an embedded digital network. They set up a satellite location that linked them to women's rights defenders across the world. They would meet there to share their stories of life on the ground and to learn and exchange on developing and improving apps. They wanted to help other oppressed communities on the continent and around the world. Most public services were shut down or privatized. The country's resources were taken over by private businesses run by high-ranking military personnel, religious leaders, and wealthy bankers. Together, they formed an alliance called the Trinity. The country's farms and agro-processing plants were owned by the Trinity. Small-scale farmers were tenants on what was once their property. They were being forced to be dependent on genetically modified seeds. With the Trinity snapping up all the country's land and charging citizens like overpriced tenants, homelessness was widespread and growing. Food insecurity was at its peak, and many people across the country could not afford to eat healthily. In many places, water was largely unavailable. Everyone was fighting for more space and paying excessively for each little bit. Many were forced to pick up small trades just to get by. The hustle was not easy. Many went the informal route: tech fraud, identity theft, sex, drugs and weapon trafficking, money laundering or organ harvesting. Many, like her younger sister and brother's niece, risked life and limb on that long, perilous journey to become an undocumented migrant worker in Brazil, India and China, where people claimed there was work. Family structure mirrored the political system. Men dominated all realms of decision-making and treated women as breeders and caretakers of children and the home. This rhetoric was strongly enforced by religious and cultural fundamentalist leaders who spoke frequently about women being the evil, weaker sex. It was dangerous to not only be a woman, but to be one with a mind and voice to change the social condition of women. Due to this, many women chose to be single, while others ran away to rural communes where women protected one another as best they could. Sadly, Mariam's mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer the year before. She hadn't had a physical checkup since 2018, before the clinics and hospitals were privatized by the Trinity. Medical insurance rose 500%, and to pay out of pocket was a death sentence. People didn't have the luxury of getting sick. When the medical staff on the cancer ward visited her mother's room, they only committed to 2 things: professing that she gave it to God by His grace, or blaming her for not coming to the hospital sooner. Day 1 of her life after university, and she was resolved to try and change this. Against all odds, Mariam had chosen to stay in her country and fight for a better future.